Hello everybody, this is Jack Dennis and welcome to our fly fishing and tying channel. I hope you're all having a good start to the new year and out tying a lot of flies. We started a couple of weeks ago with our Jack Dennis and Friends fly tying session. Our first one was with Dave Allison, and I'm going to be showing you some from the past. One of the things I've been involved with my fly tying career is setting up fly tying theaters and been involved with the many conclaves that fly fishing groups and clubs have over the country. And they really highlight tyers that you may not have ever met. And one of the best ones is one in Idaho, both the Western Idaho Expo and the Eastern Idaho Expo, which is in Idaho Falls. They've been doing these fly tying get-togethers for a long time. We're talking over 30 years. So I want to do some highlights from some that I filmed in 2009 and 2010. And you'll get a chance to meet some names you know, and maybe some names you didn't know. And one of the nice things about tying at these expos is all the excitement and sounds of people going around telling lots and lots of fly fishing stories. Most of them may be exaggerated. But one of the nice things about the theater is you get a chance to listen to the tyers talk about their experiences and answer questions. I think you're going to enjoy them. We're going to start this week with several. We'll try to give you the most information. And I know some of you are going to say, wow, you know, I don't know about the materials. Well, these are really uncut. So, you know, you do your best on figuring it out. But I think you're going to enjoy the interaction with the crowd and with the tyers. And really uncut and I think extremely fun. Let's get going. I want to say this is Jack Dennis here sitting with Jay, and I want to tell you there isn't a finer tyer that I've known when it comes to trout flies than this man right here. He ties the finest upwing flies that you can ever imagine. So listen up. And I know one thing, it's his hopper. I don't care what anybody says. They may call it the days, but he won't. He's too modest to say it. But that one that I have caught so darn many fish on, and I'll tell you, still, Jay, that it's the go-to hopper pattern in about a size 10. When I can't get them to get in that foam stuff.
You bet. Oh, that's for darn sure.
I get them to eat your hopper. So that's what you're going to tie, I guess, right?
Well, I'm going to start with that.
All right, great.
You bet.
Jay.
Well, when we're proceeding to tie a grasshopper, the first thing I have to show you is how to tie the legs. And that's the first little tricky thing that we have to do. And I didn't invent putting legs on flies. I just came up with a step-by-step method to show you how to tie the legs that will make this an easier for you to tie legs for flies, whether it's this fly or any other fly you'd like to but first we start with a long fibered material. In this case I'm using a golden pheasant tail, and I stand it in my vise. We have the long fibers, and I pull the fibers off to the right with my right hand. Right now I'm having a little trouble finding my forceps, but that's just one of those things that they're here. Yeah, my forgetfulness. So we pull these fibers off with my right hand, and I'll show you how to tie this knot in a feather. Hold it from underneath with my left hand. Take the forceps and put it in this little V-shaped notch between the fiber, my hand, and the fibers. Open up the forceps and grab the material. Then you push it off. Whoops! I opened up my forceps and let go of the material. So we'll do it again. Under the feather with your left hand, put the forceps through that notch, wrap it around the back, open the forceps, and I dropped it again. Well, in reality, I may need a little bit longer material. And I think I'll look here for a longer fibered feather. The longer the material, the easier it is to tie these. And, oh, it was my darn forceps. They weren't closing completely. Another pair of forceps will help that. So, we'll get a little longer material to show this. Again, from underneath with the left hand, put the forceps under, wrap it around, open the forceps, close the forceps. Now, I push it off the forceps, or it will lock up on the forceps. Now I have a knot, and before it's pulled tight, you can adjust the length of that knot, the length of the leg, tighten the knot, so that you have a leg and the knotted lower portion of it. And we'll do another one so we have a matching pair that we can tie on the rest of this fly. We'll readjust the feather in the vise so it's closer to the vise. It's easier to tie with less movement and flexing of the feather fibers. So we'll pull that down, set it lower in the vise. Now the feather will be easier to tie this. Again, the trick is holding it from underneath with your left hand, putting the forceps through that notch, bringing it around and closing the forceps. If you want to practice, you can use this with any kind of a feather, long fibered feather. You can do turkey tail, ringneck pheasant tail, in this case golden pheasant tail. And the reason I ended up choosing golden pheasant tail was because it is the same color on both sides. It's not darker on one side and lighter on the other like a ringneck pheasant. In that case, I had to, when I tie the legs, store them in left sides and right sides. Now, I'm using a number 6 hook. This is a 1 extra long mustad hook. This is a mustad 9671. It can be this hook or any of other similar type hooks. It can be a relatively light wire hook that will. This is a good floating fly, so it will hold up a very nice medium weight hook. What this mustad hook is, or a lighter wire hook as well. One of the things that I see around now is that is the name of this hopper, and it's been called a Dave's hopper, and it's been called a Jay's hopper. We'll attach thread. I'm going to use a yellow one. I do them in a variety of colors. In this case, I'll be using a pale yellow thread. I tie this the traditional grasshopper, Joe's hopper type original flies that Joe Brooks used was bright yellow yarn. We started from a traditional basis. We use bright yellow. I now use pale yellow, olive, tan, grays, and even some reds for particular situations. So, in many cases, the first thing we're going to attach is the tail of this grasshopper. We use dyed elk hair. It won't flare an awful lot, and it will make a good tail for this fly. Anyway, this fly originates from 1974. Here's the elk hair. It's been put in a stacker. It's a traditional item for grasshopper patterns to have a red tail. A lot of people, and the fly works just fine without this. I stick with the traditional tail, and actually it's a part of a grasshopper. The females have an egg-laying tube called an ovipositor. And in almost all species of grasshoppers, it's red. It makes for a. So I like to stick with this element of the traditional fly, the grasshopper patterns, such as the older style Joe's hopper. Next thing we'll attach here is some poly yarn, and that will be some advantage to this as far as flotation. And we'll attach that about 2/3 of the way up the hook, leaving plenty of space for the head. Now, what I want to do is make this a very consistent, see both the tail and the poly yarn are tied in at the same location. That will be the end of the body. Wrap the body material back, and as traditional with a lot of grasshopper patterns, I'll loop this, make a loop in the poly yarn, so I'll have an extended body loop. Kind of looks like the back end of a grasshopper, if you think about it that way. Now, we'll put a rib on here, a feather rib. This is a good place to use some hackle that you might not use for something else or anything else. For the bright yellow ones, I'll use a brown feather. For most of the other ones, I'm going to use a badger, which is a black center with light colored outside edges. This is a saddle hackle. We'll tie that down. And the rib will give you some flotation, but it will also give you the segmentation. And a lot of grasshoppers are very heavily segmented. It's part of part of the insect that is very obvious. But we'll wrap the poly yarn forwards, and we'll end this body not tapered, but right on top of where I started the body and the tail, so that I get a very abrupt ending to this body of this fly. Now this is very important because a fair amount of this fly now is going to end up being tied up on top of that body. If I taper it, nothing will sit right, and it will not work. We'll wrap the saddle hackle. Now this is a extremely large saddle hackle, and I'm certainly going to trim this. And again, a little bit of flotation, but primarily the segmentation. And segmentation of grasshopper is pretty obvious. This is obvious to me. It's going to be obvious to a fish. So with this extra long hackle, we'll trim this off pretty flat on the top so that it won't interrupt, push my wings up, break them up, and get in the way. And it's not going to add anything to the trout's viewpoint anyway. The hackle on the sides and underneath we'll trim to be just about the same as the hook gap, so the fly will not float too high in the water. It'll sit down very similar to the way a grasshopper sits when it falls in the water, kind of low profile, and it'll give a good silhouette for the fish. And one of the other elements that's fairly good about this fly. We'll trim that up and the stray ends of this. At this point, and the important part of that straight ending of that body is that now the underwing of deer hair, the overwing of sprayed turkey tail, and the legs will all be tied on the body, not in front of it. Now, for the deer hair, we'll select some very dark colored deer hair that comes from near the middle of the back of a mule deer. This will be dark colored, non-flaring. It will help to give some additional body and bulk silhouette to the grasshopper. It'll aid in flotation to some degree, and it will also make the wing that'll be sprayed turkey tail feather will make that more durable, so it won't break apart as readily. So take the deer hair, we'll make it so that the tips extend just about to the end of our looped extended body, and again tied down on top of that body. Now, even with this dark deer hair, I'll get a little tiny flare out of it, and if your deer hair flares more than this, an easy thing to do is take after it's secured, take one very loose wrap back on the wing. You see how nicely that holds that down, and will again give some flotation, some silhouette, and make the sprayed turkey tail wing more durable. Now the turkey tail feather that I'm going to use for the overwing has been sprayed with a polyurethane spray. I spray 3 or 4 turkey feathers at a time. Just give them a light coating to start with. I put them in some alligator clips in a board, and I set them up out in my by my wood pile where I'm not spraying inside the house, and lots of ventilation. Give them a light coating, let that dry so that the feathers are set, and then give them a couple heavy coatings so it's going to be a very durable wing, and it will hold up and last. So we'll cut a piece of that off, point the end. And the end I'm cutting in a pointed shape is the part that it was closest to the feather stem. It's the thickest. It will be the most likely to break or split if I use that to tie down the feather. So I'm tying it down on more of the tip of the feather, this tail feather, so that it'll be secure. My wing will roll over the back. And that's tied down, again, on top of the body. And cut it off right at the front. And with the underwing, the hackle, gives a nice silhouette from a grasshopper from a trout's perspective. At this point, we now take our legs that we started with and tied and attach those to the sides. It takes a little fiddling around to get them so they're lined up straight. If you want to make them, you can give the trout the idea of a injured grasshopper. In this case, the tail feathers or the leg was a little bit too long, so instead of snipping it with my scissors, I'm going to break it off with my thumbnail. We set it on the sides of the grasshopper and adjust it so whether you want the legs to be straight up. The knots on the legs will bring back almost to the end of that turkey tail wing, and about to where the forward part of that notch is. So a nice long leg, it'll be very obvious to the fish. When we invented this fly in 1974 on a float on the Snake River, one of the things that Dave Whitlock did, and I did as well, was to observe grasshoppers, live ones, from a trout's perspective in a tank of water. And the legs were very obvious. He was not sure of that before that point, and his original Dave's hopper did not have legs. Then we attach the second leg and whip finish this, and this is tied with, this part of the fly was tied with a 3/0 monocord. Now for doing the head, we will change our thread from a 3/0 monocord to an A weight thread that will spin the deer hair much better. At this point, and I usually tie these series of them, maybe a dozen at a time. When you get to this stage, you put head cement both on the where the legs were attached, but also on the knotted portion of the legs. Believe it or not, the knots will untie themselves when you're fishing if you don't put a little drop of head cement. I like to use the water-soluble Loon head cement. Doesn't have any noxious fumes. I've spent enough time tying flies that I do not like that using head cements that have bad fumes. So we'll change to an A-weight thread and attach that. Now we use a different type of deer hair for the spun hair head. With this type of a deer hair, we're going to use one with longer fibered deer hair, not too coarse, not too fine, for a size 6 or 8 grasshopper that has lots of gray coloration in it, the gray portions of the deer hair, and this will be mule deer hair. The gray portions flare very nicely, have lots of flotation, and that will be what we'll use for this. I do the grasshopper heads with 2 clumps. The rear clump, which will be the first one that I put on, we'll leave the tips of the hair on, and we'll stack those in a stacker. Trim off a suitable size clump. And that takes practice to figure out the size of the clumps. There's no measuring technique that I can find that to make that very accurate. Because the collar of this grasshopper is coarse and thick and fairly large, if I try to put this deer hair on in a manner for spinning, a customary manner for spinning deer hair, it will catch on that large collar and will leave bare spots, leave open spots, someplace around that spun head if you try to spin the hair. So instead of spinning it, I realize that what's going to happen. So I place the deer hair. I put it in a stacker. I place it on the hook where I want it. My thread is right next to the body, so I get my first wrap will be a tight wrap tight wraps right at the body, so the head is back far enough. So a little time in the stacker and get those hairs. We also want to make sure to take all the underfur out of the deer hair. And that will be very important for not only tying the deer hair in and flaring it, but also for the flotation. The underfur keeps the deer warm, but it certainly doesn't do anything to help your grasshopper float. Now, we'll measure this, and we'll want the tips of the deer hair to come back just about to the knotted legs of the grasshopper. We'll take the clump of hair, and instead of pushing it on straight forwards, that'll put deer hair through the eye of the hook, slip it on from the side and set it where I want it. With practice, I know that I want more deer hair on the top of this fly than on the sides or bottom. So this takes a bit of practice, but slip this on here from the side, put it the length I want it, turn it so the most deer hair is on the top of this, and grab it with my left hand so it's placed where I want it. This is called placing deer hair, placing and flaring it. Now we'll take two wraps around here, pull straight down off the bobbin, not around the point of the bobbin, the edge of the bobbin, and I have my deer hair flared. You can see how nicely this light colored gray deer hair flares. I'll take my thumbnail and pack it. You can use a packing tool if you'd like. Stand it up as straight as possible and then flare it some more. Carefully spiral my thread forwards through that large clump of deer hair towards the bare hook, or the bearer hook. When I've got about 4 more wraps through that deer hair, and I've flared it in each place, it will be very secure and will come to the front. Pack that some more and make sure that it is, I have an open space. Now we'll take another clump of deer hair. I'll cut the tips off of this clump because I don't need them. I don't want to confuse them when I'm trimming this with the tips of the deer hair that I want to save. Now this second clump of deer hair does not need to be stacked, but it will be because I don't have a rough collar now, as we did for the first clump. It will spin very much like they write about in the books. We'll take this with my thread right next to the first clump, hold it up. We'll use a pinch technique to make sure my thread comes right back down over the deer hair and right back down as close to that first clump of deer hair as possible. We'll pull the deer hair down, take a second wrap. Now we'll start to put some tension on this. What I'd like is I want the first couple layers of deer hair to come up and touch themselves, touch each other. If they come up and touch, you'll have enough tension on this so it will spin when you pull it, spin and distribute around the hook. If I have more than a couple layers of deer hair that touch, I've put too much pressure on it, and it probably won't, and it most likely won't go all the way around the deer hair, the hook, and distribute the deer hair, and you'll have a big gap someplace. If I don't put enough pressure on it so the first layers touch, that won't be enough pressure. It will probably just fall out of the thread when you try to spin it, and you'll get to start over. So, that's spun around there very nice, made at least a whole trip or two. I pack this with my thumb, stand the deer hair up as straight as possible, and again, spiral my thread, my A-white monocord, through the clump all the way to the eye of the hook. Make a few wraps, put in a whip finish, and my grasshopper is ready for a haircut. Now, to get to the trimming part, I found that it's best if I take this grasshopper and put it in a pair of forceps. That way I have a good handle to hold on to. I'm not getting a cramp in my finger from trying to hold on to a small hook. And have a good stable platform to start my trimming. First thing you want to do is pretty much trim this flat off on the bottom, the deer hair. What this does is just like trimming the saddle hackle we use in the body. This will allow this fly to sit low in the surface of the water, give the very much like a real grasshopper, give the trout a very nice silhouette and look at the fly. It also helps in showing off the body color, which in many cases is very important to the trout. If the trout are eating green grasshoppers, you certainly want to offer them a green grasshopper because they get very selective. A little research on the type of grasshoppers that are in the system that you're fishing can sometimes be very important. Now, I also trim this grasshopper in a different manner than a lot of grasshoppers are trimmed. I'm actually going to trim this in a manner which will leave a little flat face on the front of this fly. It'll be like a tiny little bass bug. Part of the reason is because it's the way I like to fish grasshoppers, and I want them to perform in a certain way. And in the list of certain ways I want them to perform is I like to give them action. And if I don't have a flat face on this, I give the fly a little shake or a little action and it's likely to just slide across the current towards me and away from the place I want to fish it. So I start by trimming forwards, back from the front, and taper this back with only the one deer hair tips that I want to retain. Around the collar, I can snip back to those as we go, and trim around, which you can see, try to make the trimming job even on both sides so it floats nice and level. Trim back and clip off all those non-deer hair tip feathers or fibers, and just continue to work on this a little bit so that we get this a nice tapered trim job. Lots of these grasshoppers, but if you watch a grasshopper that actually falls in the stream, they aren't exactly very good swimmers. So when I impart a little action on my fly, I want that fly to jiggle and wiggle and jump and maybe push a little water with this little flat face, but I don't want it sliding across the stream towards me. I want to impart some emotion, some action without making it leave a critical area. And this is very, very important fishing along undercut banks for a sulky brown trout or somebody that's hiding out in the dark shadows someplace. Around a rock. I'm going to fish it around a rock and give it a little twitch here and there. It certainly becomes very important that it not slide towards me or slide away from where it's going to be the most effective. This has proved over the years to be one of the more effective grasshoppers that I've ever fished. But when it was put in the 1974 book, Second Fly Tyer's Almanac, it was